Hello my friends and welcome. Something really outstanding happened. Ukraine hit the tanker of the Russian Shadow Oil fleet in Mediterranean Sea. Yeah, we all got used to all of those Ukrainian strikes on Russian tankers, Russian oil, but it is the first time the Ukrainian SBU conducts the spiderweb-like operation very far away using drones. Let's watch this video. Ukrainian SBU already published it. It shows the tanker. It is quite big, and you see what had happened? Ukraine used the drone drops to hit the top of the tanker. One kaboom, another kaboom, one more kaboom. Yeah, small drones, you can see, yeah? They're flying here. Boom. Maybe those are the kamikaze drone strikes, but looks like the drone drops here. As for me. Yeah, definitely something is dropped from the drones. And you can see the damage to the tubes and everything. Later on, the tanker started to burn. Oh my god, this is huge. We have this image also circulating in internet. Probably from the same tanker, filmed in Mediterranean Sea, completely on fire. Numerous of the drone drops caused this fire to spread. Well, there is a conflicting information coming whether this tanker was full of oil or not. Ukrainian side says that it was empty and the fire was spread because there is residual oil left in the pipelines or inside the tanker in general. Also, somehow we have the unconfirmed report about the presence of the head of the Russian military intelligence, General Andrei Averyanov, on board of that tanker. I wonder what he was doing there. Well, this report is still needed to be processed and confirmed by multiple of the sources. Andrei Averyanov is the general of the Russian intelligence who is attributed responsibility for espionage in other countries, sabotage explosions and launch of UAVs to the European Union countries. It is also he who likely blew up Prigozhin's plane and poisoned Skripal, ex-Russian spy in Britain. It is also reported that his deputies were on board. Total 7 people were injured, 2 of whom flatlined together with this general. But again, this information was posted in the morning and I'm still looking for confirmation or disapproval of it. Yeah, of course I would like it to be that way, but it looks strange for the head of the Russian GRU to be on that ship. Far away from Russia, just a tanker, they used to fancy life. They do not travel on tankers. At this moment, I'm kind of skeptical, and we'll see in the future if this general appears somewhere in media field. But again, he is in Russian GRU, so he is not the public person at all, unlike Ukrainian Budanov of GUR. And this is the picture of the tanker. The name of it is Kvandil, is in the East Mediterranean, reported 3 hours ago. Yes, burning. The vessel is en route to port of Aliaga, Turkey, sailing at speed of 11 knots, but yeah, it is the old data. Goes to Aliaga from Suez Channel, Egypt. In 2025, the registration of the vessel is Oman, but it changed lots of the flags throughout the time. And here you may see it operates from the Russian ports of Primorsk and delivers crude oil to India. I wonder how it was possible for a Ukrainian drone boat that carried those aerial drones, which in their turn dropped some of the goods on the tanker, to appear in Mediterranean Sea. There are 2 straits it needs to cross, Bosphorus and Dardanelles, so I guess I spelled it correctly. So here one goes through Istanbul, connects the Black Sea and Mediterranean, and the other is Dardanelles Strait. Dardanelles, yeah, it goes over here. For Ukrainian drone to cross it unspotted is impossible. That's why I think that the drone was carried out to Mediterranean, to the water somewhere from one of those maybe European, maybe even not European countries, or it was delivered to Mediterranean Sea in container in one of the ships. Maybe it's like one of the variants. And why did I compare this operation with the spiderweb? Then Ukraine hit lots of the Russian strategic bombers. Well, because of the distance and the way how those drones were used. So you have the mother drone With the spider web, those were trucks. Here you have the drone boat operating very, very far away. So the drones lift off and they attack some sort of the object. So Ukraine opens this, I wouldn't say Pandora box, but the new variant of how to use those drones. And even the country the size of Ukraine with the proper technologies able to target pretty much any place in the world in this case, yeah, because you have the internet connection, may have it, or those drones could be just programmed to lift off and drop the presence autonomously. I think that the modern day technologies may already allow it to happen. And it's not just about Ukraine, I guess some of the other forces sadly, but also may use this variant of attacks. It is imminent. And why is it happening? Well, if Ukraine had enough military support, it wouldn't need to invent this sort of the strikes to cut Russian economy, oil supplies, if the sanctions, strict sanctions were applied right away. But we see that our allies, sometimes they're very slow or they're afraid to escalate. That's why Ukraine has to deal with Russia as it can. Ukraine doesn't have nukes, Ukraine doesn't have long-range reliable missiles or something. Just Neptune maybe, but it's still in limited production. So Ukraine tries to find out the variants just to survive, you know. The idea is to cut economy for Russia, to degrade it little by little, and we see how it is working. Sadly, it creates the precedent for others to look, we can use the drones like that from the drone boats with the help of the Starlink or other systems. Some of the shady groups of people may look at it, and Russia, by the way, may try to perform the same act. But of course not against their own tankers. That might create a chaos in the entire world. But technologies, drone technologies, they're developing. So those kind of attacks, it was just a matter of time for them to happen. And this war just expedited everything of that. And according to the most recent information, probably it wasn't the drone boat that carried those aerial drones. It was one more ship that belonged to Ukraine. So potentially Ukraine may strike any sort of the Russian vessel or the vessel that carries Russian crude oil in every point of the world. Yeah, it's easy nowadays. And that was the last location of the ship in Mediterranean. You may see somewhere in the middle. And we also see how geography of this war has expanded. Mediterranean Sea. Crazy. Who would have thought about it? Not just the strikes deep inside Russia, but in Mediterranean waters. But also Ukraine hit platforms, oil platforms in Caspian Sea once again. Here we don't have the video itself, but the still images. Once again, those are the new images. The oil platforms belong to Russia in Caspian. This is how it looks. It was confirmed that they sustained several of the new strikes. Those will be continued. This is Lukoil platform from what I see. Well, Putin already gets angry. He mentioned that there will be retaliation action from the Russian Federation on Ukraine. Well, Russia does it all the time. They cut Ukrainian infrastructure, logistics, oil supplies as well, factories, refineries. Russia does it since the beginning of the war. But for Ukraine, it's a new step in hurting those Russian oil tankers. And there was also the information from the Axios published around 1 week ago that Donald Trump's administration allowed Ukraine to commence those strikes. Well, it just appeared that Donald Trump's administration just doesn't care. They didn't give Ukraine this permission or something. Ukraine doesn't need the permission. But Donald Trump is quite okay with what Ukraine does against Russian refineries, military infrastructure, or tankers. And we have the new very detailed images from Novorossiysk military port of the Russian Federation, where Ukraine launched a submarine drone strike on one of the Russian submarines. Those images were kind of fresh by the time, and they showed the damage done to the stern, like no stern, probably it was kaputted. Yeah, this is the comparison with the other submarine. The aft part is visible here. It seems like it's not. Later on, Russians removed one of the submarines, leaving just the damaged one in this part of the bay. That shows that definitely it was damaged. Otherwise, Russians would have removed it as well. Alright, here we have the good news. After all, European Union agreed to lend Ukraine 90 billion euros, which is more than $100 billion for the next couple of years to sustain the war against the Russian aggression. But why do I say that the news are more or less okay for Ukraine? Because after all, Europe failed to agree using frozen Russian assets. They will continue to be freezed, and with many countries opposing like Italy, it's impossible to confiscate those assets and to help Ukraine. So potentially this sum could be way, way bigger, 210 billion euros, something like that. As we know, the Russian budget for the next year for military alone is $164 billion. So in this war of attrition, Ukraine should have the similar numbers to sustain it. Yeah, so Ukraine will continue to lose the ground. Those are numbers, you cannot fight mathematics. Well, the good thing that Ukraine is after all in defense mostly, so it requires less of the military resources to stay in defense and then to attack, because then army attacks, it needs more vehicles, more army men to sustain everything of that. So maybe that is how Ukraine could resist, yeah, for the next couple of years. But still, Europe, let's say, failed its test exam on whether they are united against Russia. Europe failed to agree on confiscation. That shows the lack of the unity. And yeah, I know that some people say that no, Russian assets should not be confiscated, because Russia may sue Europe and have more funds back. But it might take decades and decades of this legal process for Russia to obtain its money back. And those risks of losing the court is way lower than losing the war against Russia. Those risks are higher, and we see how Russia escalates with the drone provocations. Their troops are spotted in Estonia just the day before yesterday. 3 soldiers, yeah. Now it's like with those drones, one drone flies accidentally, then 14 drones, 19 drones. Russia wants to escalate. And finally, multiple of the green men may appear in Baltic states one day, who knows? Putin may do it. Putin is crazy, and he says about it. Okay, Putin again with a public address, and he threatens everyone. Ukraine, Europe. He says that the new special military operations could be avoided if Russia gets its honor and respect from Western countries. Yeah, it's the first time actually he speaks openly about new special military operations. He used this term, new special military operations, so you may understand that the Russian dictator is not going to stop just in Ukraine. His goal is to restore the sphere of influence of Russia. Yeah, it was his big conference, the end of the year results. Well, the results that Russian economy continued to decline. The oil prices are the lowest for the Russian Urals brand since the beginning of the war. The Russian economy is definitely at the brink of stagflation. The Russian army is not that capable as they want. Kupiansk has been almost fully liberated by Ukraine. Russian forces are trapped, but at the same time, Putin says that Ukrainian forces are trapped in Kupiansk. Around 3,500, he said, Ukrainian troops are being encircled in Kupiansk. So he lives in his parallel reality, but he understands that still Russia has enough resources to continue the military escalation even to other countries. Yeah, he says about it. Yeah, not directly, he says, we're going to attack Baltics, we're going to attack Poland, but Russia demands respect. They demand to resolve the root causes of the war, which means for NATO to withdraw from entire Eastern Europe, by the way, together with Hungary. And what after it? Well, Putin may start its special military operations around multiple of the states to restore the Soviet Union. That is how Putin thinks, and that is what he says openly. The problem for many of the Western politicians that they still live in their bubbles. They think, oh, maybe Putin is bluffing. Maybe he's playing to negotiate, rising the stakes or something like that. No, Putin gives the plan of what Russia will do in a nearby perspective. Couple of years, we should expect the escalation of the war to NATO countries, unfortunately, guys. If everything goes according to what this guy says and according to what we see around, It will happen. It's imminent almost. Yeah, I'm sometimes not good at my predictions, but here I'm almost sure when it might happen, maybe in the next couple of years, because Putin has this window while Donald Trump is the president. So far, everything goes according to the scenario which I mentioned you before. Putin will proclaim the so-called blockade of Kaliningrad by Europeans illegal and dangerous for Russians in Kaliningrad, and Russia will try to break through Lithuania to reach Kaliningrad via Suwalki corridor, so-called. And Putin says about it. Putin says if NATO countries start a blockade of Kaliningrad region, Russia will start a full-scale war in Europe. If threats to the Kaliningrad region are created, Russia will destroy them. Everyone must understand and be fully aware that such actions will lead to an unprecedented escalation of the conflict, taking it to an entirely different level, up to a full-scale armed conflict, Putin said. And as we know, there is like partial blockade of Kaliningrad already happening. Some of the goods are being halted by European countries, and Putin anytime may say, oh, those goods are very, very important, so we need to create this corridor, go to Kaliningrad, save our people. But by moving to Kaliningrad, Putin basically cuts entire Baltic states. Yeah, this threat is more than real nowadays, and Europe again is in lack of unity. Even with this 90 billion credit for Ukraine, some of the countries are expelled of paying it, like for example Slovakia, Hungary, some other country, maybe Czech Republic. Putin knows about it. Putin has perfect conditions to start this war, to escalate, to try whether NATO is a bloc of the countries which are united, to implement Article 5, which is actually not that far away from the Budapest Memorandum if you read it out. I think that even the European Union security guarantees for its bloc is more vivid than Article 5 of NATO, where there is just promise of consultations and delivering the help necessary, and every country should define what help is necessary. Is the tweet on internet necessary support and help? Like, there's nothing about the boots on the ground. Yes, that is the option. May deploy, may do, may, but may not. And interesting Putin's remark about elections in Ukraine. He agreed on them if Ukrainians who live in Russia, he says 10 million of Ukrainians, would be granted the vote. So we're gonna ceasefire, he says, for 1 day of elections. We're not gonna ceasefire on the front lines, but we're gonna cancel the strikes deep inside the Ukrainian territory. What? But imagine those 10 million so-called Ukrainians, so-called, I mean that, yeah, there are some of the Ukrainians who live in Russia, but 10 million, come on. Russia will just say that Russians, part of Russians are Ukrainians, and they will vote for the puppet government of Ukraine. It's an absolute circus what Putin says, and the ceasefire should be for 90 freaking days. Elsewhere, on the front lines with long-range strikes, but Putin doesn't want to stop, and he uses it to push Ukraine, like this election proposal by Donald Trump, to push Ukraine harder and harder. He doesn't want not just the current government or Zelensky. Putin was not speaking with Poroshenko even. For Putin, any sort of the pro-Ukrainian government is the enemy. He wants Ukraine to be Russia, occupied partially, and to put the puppet government as, for example, in Belarus. By the way, Belarus deployed Oreshnik ballistic missile on its territory. However, it's the threat not for Ukraine, but for European, Western and Central European countries. You see, the minimum distance of Oreshnik is 700 kilometers, which means that the vast part of Ukraine, including the capital city of Kiev, is outside the range. And Crimea plus those territories are being occupied by Russia, so just a small portion of Ukraine is under this threat of Oreshnik from Belarus. So clearly it's the escalation against European countries. Zelensky already promised to disclose the location of missile to the Western intelligence. He says he knows where this missile is. Okay, that's the biggest kaboom that happened the last night in Russia. This is TOAS, Tolyatti chemical plant, let's call it like that. They produce some fertilizers and components which are used for production of the powder. And this is one of the biggest enterprises of that type, not just in Russia, but in the entire world. So maybe the prices for fertilizers will go up because this was a very capable factory in Taliati, Russia. It's called Taliati Azot. This was the first kaboom, and totally there were 6 kabooms reported by locals. And this is Oryol, where Ukraine hit the thermal power plant. It's the regular target. There was some flashes, and the part of the city went completely blank. Every night Ukraine is focused on those long-range strikes, and it was very important for Ukraine to obtain the support from the European Union to maintain not just its economy, but also the production of the long-range drones. Zelensky said about it just recently that Ukraine needs more production, otherwise Russia might have or obtain the advantage over Ukraine on the front lines using FPV drones, smaller drones, longer drones. That would be better, but Ukraine obtained the partial military support once again that will be extended for a couple of years, and barely enough for Ukraine to withstand against Russia. Yes, unfortunately, not united Europe is not willing to support Ukraine for its victory. They want to support Ukraine just to lose territories gradually, which is pretty much okay for Putin, as we see. Yeah, maybe I'm too much pessimistic about this stuff, but we'll see. After all, it's a good thing that Ukraine obtained those funds, or will obtain. Fantastic. Well, we have some breaking news. So this photo from the FP1 or FP drone camera was published by Ukrainian SBU just right now. They say that Russian ship was hit not that far away from Crimea, close to Sevastopol. This is the Russian Coast Guard ship. This is how it looks, and it's not the first time that those kind of the ships are being hit by Ukrainian drones or the drone boats. Russia has several of those. They operate in the Black Sea, and their task is to hunt Ukrainian drone boats. They also might carry some of the surveillance drones and Lancet drones, which are hitting those Ukrainian boats. Well, in this case, it was a fat target for Ukrainian FP1 or FP2 drones, which are quite capable, able to fly for a very, very long distance. I'm just waiting for clarification whether the ship was damaged or completely kaputted by the drone. I guess just damaged, because FP2 drones, they carry roughly 100 kilograms of TNT. It's not enough for the ship to drown. It depends where it could be hit, but if above water level, I think it will not go down. But it could be damaged and out of service for several months for sure. Alright, and now let's go to some of the frontline updates. So you may see this is the Russian convoy full of all-terrain vehicles. All of the vehicles were kaputted, some of them, like most of them, caught fire. Russian infantry landed from the vehicles and probably also smoking nearby. The area was geolocated and confirmed. Russia lost at least 10 of the all-terrain vehicles and who knows how many infantry forces. And it happened in Pankivka, between Pankivka and Mayak. This is Dobropila direction. Russians are trying to regain the territory which they lost before in October. I guess it was successful Ukrainian counterattack before Russians propelled to Zoloty Kolodets here, but now not any longer. They were partially encircled, but Russian command forces them to attack. As we see, most of those attacks are not that successful or unsuccessful at all. It happened somewhere over here. Previously, this convoy, they stopped. Russians just waited on the road for HIMARS to visit them together with FPV drones, and this is one more attempt. We don't yet have the marker on this map from Maikos, but he will publish it for sure. This is a very fresh information. I'm just giving it to you as I receive it. Also, according to the data of Unit Observer, Ukrainian brigades reinforcing the flanks of Mirnograd, Pokrovsk, also to the south, and Dobropila direction too. The 35th Marine and 95th Air Assault Brigades were transferred from their previous positions to each of the city's flanks after the situation inside Pokrovsk deteriorated. And yes, in Pokrovsk it's definitely difficult. You may see, I told you about those losses of the Ukrainian vehicles. Those were lost before. They were just confirmed recently. But all of the attempts of the Russian army to close the gap here in Mirnograd, with the main forces at least, they are failing so far. And all of the moves of the Russians behind this railway, they're after all being stopped by Ukrainian defenders. Russia uses elite forces of the 76th Aeromobile Brigade. And also they use foreigners to fight there, and some of them were even imprisoned recently in Pokrovsk. There was the group of 5 of the mercenaries. 3 of them were flatlined by Ukrainian counterattack forces in a specific spot, and 2 decided to surrender. They're uninjured, so that is how they were capable to save their lives. Surrendering is the only way for Russians and for those mercenaries who say that they were lied about their contracts in the Russian army or in Russia in general. This guy says that he signed a contract for welder, but he was sent to the front line, and this one came to Russia for a part-time job. He was working in Dubai before, maybe in construction service somewhere. So he was taken to Russia, Russian army. That's what they say, but they could lie. Yeah, maybe they signed the contracts voluntarily. Especially we know that many of the Colombians, they signed the contracts with Ukraine, with Russia, mostly with Ukraine. So for Ukraine, it's important to pay good salary for those mercenaries, for them not to choose the Russian side after all. So they just crossed this road and appeared on the other side, which is mostly controlled by Ukraine. Now let's go to not so good news. Gulaipole, the situation there is deteriorating every day. It seems like we have the explanation from our analytics and from deep state military map source. They know what they're speaking about. They're communicating with officers, soldiers, volunteers on the ground, and they say about the mistake in Ukrainian defense in Gulaipole. Ukraine is forced to use also not capable forces sometimes, not capable for defense. As it happened in Gulaipole, it is not like the best of the best forces Ukraine has out there. It's the local territorial defense formed mostly from the mobilized soldiers without military experience, let's say. So it was yesterday, it is today. Russians went already in Gulaipole itself. They crossed this river. So the chance for Gulaipole to be fully occupied as Siversk very fast. Yeah, Siversk is under Russian control almost fully. So exactly the same playbook is going, maybe there is the chance for it to happen even here. Yeah, this is the article from Deep State about this event. Due to the sabotage of some officers of 102nd Motor Rifle Brigade, there is the risk of losing Gulaipole. Those are from Terror Defense. On this photo, they say it's nearly a friendly fire that was performed by the same brigade on its own. Yeah, luckily they were at the last moment identified as the friendly soldiers, but it tells a lot about the chaos with command decision making in this specific spot. Now Ukraine tries to send capable brigades out there to compensate the losses, 225th, 33rd, but they acted already in Pokrovsk, so Ukraine has a limited amount of the capable forces, as well as Russia, by the way. But Russia takes the ground with the help of the prevailing resources, also army men, and Ukraine doesn't have this thing to use. Deep State Analytics found out that some of the officers of 102nd Brigade, they're panicking, and they are forcing their soldiers to leave their positions. I'm not sure if it is true, but they say like that. Also, there are problems with communication. 102nd Brigade doesn't know what is happening nearby. Yeah, usual. There are lots of the wounded personnel there in Gulaipole, including commanders, which complicates the decision-making and further defense of Gulaipole. At the same time, Russians continue to spread their propaganda, also according to Deep State, about their success in Gulaipole, that they captured this settlement. Plus, they post some of the inappropriate videos with allegedly Ukrainian soldiers who are actually Russians. They just wear Ukrainian uniform. They speak Ukrainian with a very huge accent, and they beat each other. So something like that. Usual things that happen in the Russian army. Again, lots and lots of disinformation on internet. Well, I usually trust Deep State Analytics, but I'm not there on the ground as well as they are, so who knows what is really happening. But judging on the very fast move of the Russian army in Gulaipole, definitely there are the problems with defense in Ukraine. So I would say this assault is quite substantial. I didn't expect it to happen that fast. And also, Russians moved in Dronivka. This is the interesting name of the village, Dronivka. So it was yesterday, it is today. Not far away from Siversk, where Russia was successful before. So there was the Ukrainian counteroffensive in Kupiansk. Where is Kupiansk? It's over here, but By the way, it seems like Ukraine is counterattacking from the north here already towards Dvorishna. Well, at least I have this information, not yet being confirmed, just rumors spread also by Russian channels, by the way. So this was the biggest success for Ukraine in 2025 if we speak about the front lines. This operation was conducted not for one day, but there was the fog of war for 2 weeks, and after all there was the update from Deep State. They didn't provide any sort of the detailed information to make it more secret. Plus, the Dobrapilya counteroffensive was successful for Ukraine. So there are some of the good news, right? This year or for the last few months we had. But in general, Russia still keeps an advantage and takes the ground. It is visible in multiple of the spots. Guys, I want to thank you for your kind support on Patreon. The link for my Patreon is in the video description right below. You may also support my channel on membership, and only because of that support I'm capable to film videos on my YouTube channel. You're driving my motivation to do it every day, so thank you so much for it. And if you don't have this opportunity to support me in that way, you may press like to this video and also subscribe for the channel to make the video more popular in YouTube algorithms. Thank you so much for that as well. My friends, I wish you all a peaceful sky wherever you are, and have a great time.